Hello, remote workers and computer-generated berserkers. It's been almost a year of pretending to be productive online while running Civilization 5 in another window. But apart from the uncontrollable disease, larceny, and maddening lack of any meaningful human connection, there were a whole lot of funky tunes spilling onto the scene all the while. And utilizing the power of the internet and a USB microphone, I have compiled for you a collection of this year's music that I feel is the most worth your time and attention. For those unfamiliar with my format, I avoid ranking albums numerically, because even under the umbrella of Heffy metal, there's just too much variety for direct comparisons to mean very much. Instead, I will present to you, with your permission, a listing of my absolute favorite releases of 2020, followed by a smaller list of feebler contestants that I still feel are very much worth recommending. Now that we're acquainted, I'd like to show you the first of these favorite releases of mine, Throne of Iron. I was baffled to see this on my list, thinking it came out in early 2019 somehow, but no, regardless of how I perceive time, it was early 2020 that blessed us with this Dungeons & Dragons-styled adventure. This album proved to be pretty divisive among my peers, which is fair because the band's style is not only tongue-in-cheek, but it also has a very small-time, homemade feel. Personally, I find that endearing, and it gives Throne of Iron a fun, passionate, and more than anything, authentic energy that allowed it to contribute to this year's traditional metal mania. But they weren't alone, of course. Markrav, in my heavily Americanized German, released their debut album of what is effectively Cirith Ungol worship crossed with an early black metal aggression, especially on the drums. The vocalist puts on his best Tim Baker impression, which I understand sounds disastrous on paper, but it ties together very nicely. They must have left their notebooks open, though, because another band copied them this year. Cirith Ungol also released an album in the style of Cirith Ungol. Yeesh, but for real, these old-school sweethearts did us all proud with their first album in almost 3 decades. If you keep up with old-school heavy metal at all, you know that a hiatus that long is usually a death blow to a band's creativity and cohesion. But despite the shadows of doubt lurking around my brain, Cirith came back with an album more or less on par with their classic discography, which is not a small feat for any band, let alone one of my personal favorites. They also had their old demo remastered and re-released on tape and digital platforms, which is very cool and nice. I'm even more thankful they're back because Forever Black is part of the reason I got back into reading this year, prompted by the track Frostmonstream that references Fafherd and the Grey Mouser. It's exactly the background I needed to properly appreciate Eternal Champion's long-awaited sophomore album, Ravening Iron. Funny enough, this was also the most disappointing album of the entire year for me. The band's debut had this harrowing, epic, melancholy feel across every track, and while it's not totally absent from the new album, they seem to have swapped it for thrashier sensibilities. More Iron Age and less Graven Right, if that means anything to you. And yet, even without catering to my exact tastes, Eternal Champion managed to make one of the most impactful albums of the year. That being said, this album took a couple listens to properly grow on me, but I found that reading vocalist Jason Tarpe's tie-in novel, The Godblade, exponentially increased my enjoyment. It's not the next great American novel by any stretch, but look at this album cover. You know what you're getting yourself into. But when Eternal Champion left me in the cold, the Megaton Sword comforted me with both its impractical weight and its monumental tales of sacrifice. Just look at that village. I can tell you for a fact none of that was insured. I don't like to pick favorites, which is what I tend to say immediately before picking favorites in these videos, but Megaton Sword left one hell of a mark on me this year. Different genre, but same caliber, Criminy Jim Jim's Abysmal Lort's Cathedral EP caught me by surprise. I love Disciples of the Inferno, and their album last year was fine, but Cathedral is unlike anything I've heard these Louisiana maniacs do before. It's war metal, so it has chaotic tendencies, but there's simultaneously something so subdued and comforting about it, like a cozy little cocoon of evil. To top it off, it's only 10 minutes long. Baby, you could tank 6 of these in an hour. Or you could spice things up with the 16-minute Larvae demo, one of the first new releases I heard this year, and I knew all the way back in March we'd be here right now, singing the praises of this crispy, crunchy, death doom metal that utilizes sloppy cassette compression to its full potential. It was also love at first sight when I first fell into Exaugurate's Chasm of Rapturous Delirium. Not quite as rapturous as the brochures will tell you, but this band tackles that new wave of incantation-style death metal that was refined by Dead Congregation, and swear on my mother they do it so well. So well, in fact, that I decided to roll the dice on one of their label mates that I had been actively avoiding. Phobophilic. I assumed they were going to be deathcore, or some other kind of cleanly produced technical mumbo-jumbo that doesn't sit well with me, purely because they seem to be named after the Cryptopsy song Phobophile. And while I love old-school Cryptopsy, don't get me wrong, the bulk of their later stuff is not at all the kind of extreme music that I enjoy. Boy, was I horribly inaccurate in my speculation, because they also play in this incantation-inspired, dare I say it, cavernous death metal sphere of influence, and it rules. It's just totally solid modern death metal, released as a split with Sedimentum, who also sounded fantastic, so the moral of this little anecdote is that Rotted Life Records has good quality control. But speaking of nothing, I don't need a segue into every new band. I just want to talk about Omega Vortex, a chaotic, high-speed fusion of black and death metal. Mostly death metal, reminiscent of Necrovore and the many bands that followed in their footsteps. Black Abomination Spawn is a dense record, but that's an advantage when it comes to re-listens, because there's always something new to appreciate when you fall back into the swirling maelstrom of blackness. These horses are pretty cute, but this ain't no petting zoo, folks. It's just Parrish with God's right hand. I've always been partial to his left personally, but I know when a compromise is necessary. This EP is debatably not even metal. Parrish sounds like the 70s rock from right around the birth of metal, but I think it's close enough for this list. But speaking of close enough for this list, sometimes segues are effective. Smolder was nowhere near a release of the year contender when I first heard it. There was nothing wrong, I just wasn't feeling it at the time. But something kept drawing me back in. I don't know. Maybe the passion demonstrated by Smolder and their social media presence, or their heartwarming admiration for the classic band Manila Road. But regardless of why I kept listening to Dream Quest Ends, I did. And now I see it for the epic doom brilliance it truly is. True story. Haggis, straight from the slaughterhouse. I love this band and all the related projects. Those of you blessed in the memory department may remember Odoplasty from last year. But admittedly, gore grind is gore grind, and I don't have very much to say. There's no daring new technical progression or inspired genre fusion. It's just gore, gore, and more gore, baby. And as far as modern acts go, Haggis is the top of their class. Right up there along with their impetigo-worshipping salutatorian, gruesome stuff relish. This band plays a more death metal-inspired flavor of grind, but it gets me relishing gruesomely just as well. This release is a split with the band Awful, which I am significantly less familiar with, but I did enjoy what I heard from them. Precambrian is one of the many projects by Roman of the Ukrainian black metal scene. It's not nearly as old as the name suggests, but Precambrian features more of the kind of masterful riffing and nail-biting progression that you'll hear from his other bands, like Drutk and Blood of Kingu. Truly a proficient riff writer, that man, but this project leans more on the atmospheric side of black metal, the polar opposite of which could be boldly described as ripping stadium battery metal, a tag so ferociously brain-dead and powerful that I can't even speak its name without sweating egregiously. This is one of the many projects from the NVNM collective, and while I struggle to keep up with the sheer volume of content they produce, I am rarely disappointed. As for the Gauntlet, it lives up to that. This EP is very reminiscent of early German thrash and early black metal in general. NVNM also put out Tempter's Sacrament. I put this demo under thrash metal on these cute little cards that I like to make for the Album of the Year videos. Definitely more thrash-leaning than the Gauntlet, but still with that German extreme factor in its sound. Havukruunu, somber black metal with that kind of ambiguously triumphant tinge to it that some call pagan. I don't know, that descriptor never sat well with me, but here it's pretty fitting. Unlike the Necromantia cover on the new Sesiedicles. Holy moly, I'm not opposed to cover songs or bonus tracks of any sort, but for goodness sake, boys and girls, please leave it to the end of the album. Though aside from the placement of literally one track, I have no nitpicks. Sesiedicles is well into their career by now. They know what they're doing, and they've delivered even more of that ever so slightly melodic style that, in my opinion, peaked with Ritual of the End. Another heavy hitter in the ever-popular good releases with totally unnecessary cover songs category is Yatheria. I don't know, I should have checked that before. A modern Greek power duo of the Necromantia vocalist and the Rotting Christ bassist, at least for their first 3 albums. There are only 2 original tracks, but they've made me very eager to hear what their impending 2021 full-length will sound like. Right now it's got kind of a laid-back, mid-period Rotting Christ sound, but I could definitely imagine them evolving beyond that. Time will tell. And finally, Moomin Banal, Pastoral Québécois Black Metal Maniacs, a modern project that strikes me as something of a spin on that rustic but reasonably hooligan scene in France. Outressy kind of vibes, you feel me? I also love the artwork. This could have been ripped straight from a 1950s Christmas card for all I can tell, but it has a very unique presence even among stylistically similar releases. This, dear viewers, has been a look into the most powerful, strategic, jovial, and lip-smacking releases of a year otherwise noted for its lack of lip-smacking material. But they can't all be jaw-droppers, which is why I will now proceed to the second tier, known formerly as the Legion of Music that did not necessarily blow me away but was worthy of discussion nonetheless. Beginning with the Hellenic heavy lifters of Coir. They've been on my lists in the past, and while they haven't gotten over that penchant for blatantly unchristian displays of a wicked variety, Coir is still at the top of their game. As is Saxa, though their release comes as more of a surprise. Coir came out swinging in 1993 and never really slowed down from there, but Saxa, God, that's a mouthful, is still mostly associated with their 1992 Hellfire demo and not very much in between. Devoted to Him was surprisingly tame, but it's nice to see some golden oldies still kicking around. Especially because for the rest of this list, every release is from a relatively new band or project, such as Primitive Warfare. These boyoys are so young they ain't even developed kneecaps yet, which might explain how the drummer can abuse his legs so often and so flamboyantly. If the presence of 2 logos on the cover didn't tip you off, this is in fact a split with the band Bog Body, a grimy, sludgy, ride for revenge type outfit that historically hasn't really appealed to me, but I really enjoyed what I heard here. Sanctifying Ritual has apparently been a thing since 2008. I don't know, I'm not Catholic, but as far as death metal goes, this was one of the better ones. Before anyone asks, Andrew Lee is not secretly funding this channel. I genuinely enjoy his releases, no matter how numerous and depraved some of them may be. But yeah, Ripped to Shreds began as an exceptional but nevertheless fairly standard worship of Swedish death metal, but the man has gone hard on his guitar techniques and flaunts his solos and instrumental bridges and all kinds of bells and whistles that probably have technical terms that I don't care to learn. There's just too much. Music theory nerds must have innumerable forms. That was a good transition. These guys put out a certified Sicko Mode EP in 2010, but I haven't really clicked with them as hard until now. Despotic Rule is the band at their best. Those of the Catacombs must live in close quarters with the mortuary drape gugas because Scolopendra is weird in the same spooky primitive vein, albeit much less meandering occult creepiness and a lot more traditional death metal. I wasn't as rattled as the fellows on the cover seemed to be, but I did get several kicks out of the album. But it's claustrophobic down here. Let's regroup above, at the crossroads of infinity, Dragcarr's latest offering, and damn! As someone who's been following this band for a while, definitely not the album I was expecting. It's galloping melodic death metal in the same vein as, Sacrifix? Either way, very well put together, and you can't go wrong with Karmazid artwork. Right? Heretical Sect. I actually met these guys over Instagram originally, which robbed the album of some of its mystique, but that all came rushing back once I learned that the album was somehow a thematic critique of the romanticization of cowboy culture. I don't know exactly what they're going for, but the Lone Ranger remake sucked and the music is tight, so full support. Ninkar Sag dropped what I think is a preview of an upcoming album. That's basically what a demo is, but it's unclear to me if they're going to re-record this stuff or if it literally is a promo in the vein of the old school. But I can tell you right now, this band sounds like the Black Dahlia Murder combined with Sorcier de Glace, an unorthodox but rewarding combination of styles. Diabolic Oath performed with profane death excellence, with a more orthodox combination of styles, black and death metal. Usually this style doesn't lend itself too well to full-length albums, but the writing here, despite the chaos, is actually pretty engaging. I need to listen to fewer French-speaking bands. This is an atmospheric black metal solo project from one of the founding members of Vortex. Just another fun release to demonstrate further Quebec's impressive output last year. Shield Roar goes heavy on the synths and recreates the authentic feel of a 90s black metal demo that got forgotten immediately, only to be drudged up decades later and celebrated exclusively on internet forums. That can be spun as a compliment if you try hard enough. Undagang hardly needs an introduction. Sluggathor and Rotravor inspired modern death metal mamacitas that haven't made a misstep ever. And it's really been paying off lately. As far as underground death metal bands go, these guys get a ton of exposure. It's gotten to the point where I wouldn't even be surprised if I saw someone casually wearing their merchandise at the mall. I could not be stopped. I'm glad Mall was brought to my attention so early because the quality and general presentation of their early demos is reminding me a lot of that time in 2016 when Tomb Mold generated a lot of hype which eventually blasted them off into the unfathomable heights of the underground still, but they sold a lot of records. I can't tell you where Mole is heading next, but I'm keeping an eye on them. We need more mold and less gore and blood in death metal. Seriously, we've got a blood plethora on our hands. Feel free to slow your heartbeats at your nearest convenience. Taphos has already begun stockpiling with this cozy little demo that went largely unnoticed, but it runs parallel to those other claustrophobic Danish bands that I've mentioned in the past, namely Phrenolith and Sulphurus. Certainly worth 14 minutes of your time, and it looks like I was too. I have no idea if this video is going to end up being 14 minutes, but that line would work really well if it does. Whatever, you all know the drill. Feel free to let me know your favorite releases in the comments. I'll have a link for every mentioned release wherever possible in the description of this video, and I'll see you all in a week? 5 months? I don't have an upload schedule. I love dust.